Welcome to Sanctuary in Soil and this video series on First Garden Basics. My name is Aisha, and in this 12-step video series, I am sharing with you all of the steps that you need to know so that you can start your first garden. Now, they are small steps, but deep enough that as you're going through this process, you will be able to have success in your first garden. So far, we have covered the first 5 steps of the First Garden Basics. They're why you should start a garden, where you should start a garden, when you should start a garden, in what you should start a garden, and what should you grow in your first garden. In this step number 6, we are going to cover the plan. And in this particular step, we're actually going to go into the layout of your garden and the decisions that you need to make as you are planning the garden for your spring season. There are so many options, because if you are maybe doing a potting garden, there's lots of options for that. If you're doing an in-ground garden, like the bed back here behind me, then the decisions to be made behind that. And then if you're doing a raised bed garden, like mine raised beds back there, there's so many options, right? And so what I'm going to do is I am going to be focusing on a small garden in the backyard, kind of like mine, so that I will show you and share with you the different concepts, the thought process behind how to plan, depending, no matter what size of garden you're going to have. My goal in this step is that I can share with you the how to think about the planning of your garden, and not exactly what to think about it, because what to think about it is different based on the type of garden you're going to have. And so as I show you how I go through the process of planning my garden, then you can then take those concepts and applying to the garden you are going to start. Now, I'm a little bit of a high-tech kind of gardener. I like to plan my garden in an Excel sheet. So I'm literally going to show you how I do it. Now, you can do it in paper, with crayons, with pencil. You don't have to use Excel like I do, but I'm going to go through it so that you can see how I do it. But before we start, I want to share some things that for you to consider and remember as we're going through the process. First, because we're going to be making a plan for your garden, right? You already kind of determined in the last step the vegetables that you want to grow. Now, as we're going through how many of each, you need to remember how big is your garden, because sometimes we end up thinking that our garden is bigger than it really is. And so we want to make sure that, first of all, keep it simple, following the rules that I shared in the last step, which is, what you're going to eat, what your family likes, etc. Also, you need to think through what you're going to do with the food. Ideally, you're going to eat it. Now, if you end up with too much, you might end up donating it. The last thing I want to do is for you to end up wasting it. And so that's why you have to always keep in mind the size of your garden, so that as you go through your planning process, right, you're going to be able to pick and decide the number of plants that you're going to start or buy for your first garden. Something else to consider is the space that your plants will need, not when they're babies, but as they grow and they mature. You have to really consider what that happens, because that's one of the biggest mistakes I made, right? I was so ambitious. I planted a lot of plants in my second garden, actually. And then they grew and there was no space, and lack of space and air circulation brings sickness. So you have to consider, when you look at your plants, not only the radius that they need, because you want to know how wide and how tall they are as you're planning your garden. Just because they start tiny, it doesn't mean that they're going to stay tiny, because they grow sometimes into Chihuahuas and sometimes into Great Danes. So it is important that you really know what your plant is going to look like at full maturity, so that they can be healthy and productive. Let me give you an examples of things that happened, to me. For example, with tomatoes, there are some tomatoes that are determinate, meaning that they are only going to grow to a certain size, and then they stop. But then there are tomatoes that are indeterminate, meaning that they're going to keep growing as long as you give them support and nutrition and space. They're going to keep growing and producing. So I put my tomatoes way back there in my back fence, and I actually extended it so that it is almost 9 feet tall. Literally last season, my tomato plants went beyond the fence that I created for them. And so it is very important that you know that, right? And you have to then have a way to fasten them to the fence or to the trellis so that they are healthy and they can continue to produce. Something else to think about is, roots like garlic and onions. You may use those. You may want to plant those, but you have to remember how long those plants take to go to maturity. And so you need to think through that, because if you plant garlic in the place where you want to plant peppers, for example, eventually you're going to have to make a decision. Do you pull the garlic out early to plant your peppers, or you end up with a shorter pepper season? And so those are the things that you have to continue to consider. Let me tell you, even with flowers, I have always seen marigolds everywhere to be small like this, and that's how they got. And so I planted seeds of marigolds last season, and lo and behold, these marigolds end up being 3 feet tall. And I'm like, they were in the middle of my garden, when I thought, in my planning process, I thought they were going to be 1 foot tall and they were going to fit within the garden. And yet here I am with a 3-foot marigold plant. And so you really need to pay attention at all the information for that particular variety, because just because it's a marigold, not all marigolds or not all plants are the same. So for that reason, part of the planning process, you have to really get to learn how your plants grow, and I'm going to show you in my planning sheet. Part of that planning is going to be how many plants you are going to either buy as starter plants or grow from seed. And so when you do that, you need to consider, how much will you eat? Not only that you will eat them, but how much would you eat? You also want to do, if you're going to have, either from seed or even startups, you want to have, 1 or 2 backups, because sometimes plants do die. And also, if you're going to get into preserving, whether it's canning or freezing, probably you're not going to get into canning. I'm not even into canning yet. But I do a lot of freezing. I love to freeze onions. I love to freeze peppers. I love to freeze tomatoes. And that's really, really simple. And I can show you probably in a tutorial I'll link at the bottom of this video in the future. And so, if you want to have extras for you to freeze or in the future canning, you have to consider that, right? Also remember, you're going to be harvesting leaves, fruits, and roots. So when you're doing the leaves, lettuces, kale, Swiss chard, you have to remember, like this is a Swiss chard that you're going to be cutting. Are they cut and come again, or are they going to grow ahead and then you take them away? This Swiss chard I have right here is one of my favorites. Isn't it beautiful? It's actually cut and come again. Like I have actually cut, and like you see here, I have cut some of these Swiss chard, and I have made it onto omelets and all kinds of things and soups. But it keeps growing, so it keeps coming back. So based on that, you need to know, okay, if it's going to be something that will continue to grow and not continue to harvest, you don't need that many, right? Now, in the area of roots, 1 seed is 1 radish. And so if you want to have a meal in which you're going to have radish, like maybe roasted radish as a side dish, then you're going to need a lot of radishes for 1 meal. So see how that is different? And when it comes to fruits, 1 plant could end up being 10 tomatoes. So all of those things are the things that you have to consider when you're selecting not only the plants you're gonna get in your garden, but also how many you're gonna get and what is the variety that you are growing. All right, enough of that. So let me go ahead and take you to my planning process so that you can see how you can start your plan. Hi. Welcome to my office. So I wanted to come in here because I'm going to be sharing how I plan my garden. And like I mentioned, I use this program called Excel. Some of you may be familiar with it. Some of you may not, or maybe you are familiar with it but don't know how to use it. It's okay. You really do not need a program like Excel to plan your garden. I literally started with just paper and in drawing it with pencil. And then once I had an idea, I moved to Excel. But you don't really have to. Most gardeners literally just have notebooks and either white paper or that square paper, that math paper that has all the little squares. And in that, you can easily plan your garden. Now, something that is going to be important is that when you are planning your garden, or when you're making a drawing of your garden, if you do not use Excel, that you make it to scale. And what that means is that, for example, I have a ruler here. What you should do is, because you want to make sure when you are deciding or planning your garden, we're going to talk about distances between plants and how big and tall they get, etc. When you think of the placement of your plants, assuming you're going to do it in ground or in raised beds. If you do it in pots, it doesn't matter as much because, one plant, one pot, or maybe you have different root plants in the same pot. But, because it's one pot, that's the space you have defined for it. But once you're looking at either in ground or raised beds, you really need to carefully think about the distances between the plants, and you're going to see that in a second. So when you're doing the drawing in paper, the way that you do it in scale means that, for example, you can say 1 inch equals 1 foot. So if you're going to make a bed that is 2 feet by 8 feet, then you're going to get a piece of paper and you're going to draw 8 inches will be 8 foot, and then the depth is going to be 2 feet, so it's 2 inches, and that's how you draw it, so that you can do it to scale, so that the dimensions of the drawing of the bed in which you're going to be planting your garden is exactly right. So when you're deciding where you're placing the plants, you are caring, or you are doing it respecting the space that each of them need. Now, I'm going to show you how I do it, so it's going to be a lot clearer than what I'm saying right now. But I just want to let you know that. So even though I'm doing in Excel, it doesn't mean that you have to, okay? But that's how I do it, and I just want to share it with you. So let's go to Excel. Okay, hi, I'm here. Okay, so now that we are here in Excel, before we start with what I'm going to tell you, I want to show you that we're going to look at two things. First is the fact that you need to keep a record of each of the plants that you want to grow, so that you gather the information. Now, not all of the seed packets have all the information, assuming you're going to have, seeds. And so you're going to have some of the information that you need when you're making your plan will be in some of the packets in the back, right? Some of them will have the information that you need, and some of them will have some of the information, and some of them will not have all of the information that you need. And so what is important is that if you're going to start from seed, look at what the packet says. If not, just do a Google search, literally on your phone or on your computer. You can put in there, what plant you are going to plant and what is the variety, and it will give you all of this information. With all of this information, now you can make the plans for your garden. So this is an example of the type of information that I gather. Again, I use Excel because I love it, but you can literally have a notebook. Lots of gardeners just do it on a notebook, and they say, okay, in one page to put what the plant is, the crop name is, and all of this information, so that they can refer to it when making their plans. So let me just give you these two examples. So as you can see, here below, you can see that I have the crop name right here. I'm going to give you the example of basil and tomato. And then we have the harvest type. Basil is an herb, so that's why you harvest the herbs, the leaves, and the tomato is a fruit. And then you have the variety. So this is sweet basil and cherry purple tomato. So all of the information that comes, all that information has to do with these two exact plants. Believe it or not, within the different varieties of basil, this information may change. And definitely within the hundreds of varieties of tomatoes, this information will definitely change. And so it is important that you actually write down the information for the plant or the crop and the variety that you are planting so that you can have the accurate information. So here, for example, the basil is a sweet basil. My plan is I'm going to plant 2 of those basil plants, but you're going to see that later. And some of the seed packets had the ideal temperature. This tells me that basil, their ideal temperature is between 70 and 85 degrees, and for tomato is 75 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is for this particular ones. Now in sun, I see that they require 8 to 12 hours. Now remember that I mentioned in an earlier video that my garden literally only gets about 6 to 7 hours a day of sun. And still, I grow basil quite well and tomato too. So even though it tells you that this is the ideal amount of hours, if you have less than that, don't shy away from still trying, okay? Now, here it tells me when I should start the seeds. Now, I got a little fancy here because I use formulas, but basically the way I calculate it is this. First of all, I need to plant basil and tomato after my first frost. And if you remember, where I live in Georgia, I am in zone 7B through 8. I'm right in the middle of those two. And our last frost date is April 1st. That means that I cannot I cannot transplant or direct sow until after April 1st. And so I decided that I'm just going to plant on April 15, which is 15 days after the last frost date, okay? So because of that, then if I'm gonna wait 15 days to actually transplant, because I start most everything from seed, but I also buy some plants. So if that's the case, I will only put it in the garden after, or on around about April 15 or April 16. And that is 8 weeks. And okay, so if I planted on April 16, that means that I need to start the plants sooner than that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start basil and tomato, and this is recommended in the package, by the way, how many weeks before transplanting you can start before the last frost date. So for basil, it's around 8 weeks, and for tomatoes, about 8 weeks. I think tomatoes 8 to 10, something like that, or 6 to 8, something like that. I'm just gonna pick a date, 8 weeks. So I'm gonna start my seeds 8 weeks before the last frost, so that by the time I transplant them, they're gonna be already 8 weeks old. So 8 weeks, that's 56 days. And I want to transplant them 15 days after the first frost date. So basically the 8 weeks from the 15th ends up being around February 19th, right? And so which is 2 months basically, right? February, March, April. And so that is how I come up with this information. Now, I also know that the germination time, which means how long between I put the seed in the soil in my little, starter pack, and the seed actually germinating, meaning getting the first leaves coming out, is about 7 to 14 days for both of these. By coincidence, I picked these two as examples and they have the exact same amount of days. So that means that anywhere between 7 to 14 days, it is how long it normally takes to germinate. So that means that once I put the seed down, and am I 10 days in and I don't see anything, I don't need to worry about it because I know that the seeds are going to come up at some point in time soon. All right, so then the next thing that I have in here is the spacing from center. This is very important. I mean, and a lot of the packs give you the information. They give you sometimes ranges. For example, here it might give you 8 or 10 to 12 inches. For tomatoes, it might be 18 to 24 inches. So at the end of the day, you need to decide, okay, based on this recommendation, I'm going to pick this, okay? This is going to be very important when we're making the actual plan for your space in your garden. And then this is the information that a lot of seed packets do not provide. A lot of them do not provide how tall these plants get. So my suggestion is if any plant that you have, whether you start seeds or you buy them a starter, and if it does not tell you how tall these plants get, research it. before you put them in your garden, because you're going to be surprised. Some of these plants require 18, 24 inches all around to have enough space to be able to grow successfully. So this is a very important information, the height of this plant, so that you can actually the height and the space from center, so that you can actually plant it in a way that is healthy for them. Okay, and the last information that I have in here is the days to maturity. That means that from the moment that I transplant these plants into the garden, how many days for me to start harvesting from them. And in this particular example, it literally is 80 days. That means 2 months and 10 days from the moment I plant the basil and the moment that I plant the tomato. I will be able to start harvesting tomatoes, and I will be able to harvest basil. Usually basil maybe is a little earlier than that. This is just what they say based on, you know, the ideal circumstances of time and temperature and sun and everything, right? Again, all of these are just guidance. You know, because even though it says here germination day is 7 to 14 days, and if for some reason they germinate in 5, don't be scared, don't be worried. It could just be that the soil was warmer, the circumstances were way too perfect, and they germinated. This is just general guidance. And again, these are live, things, seeds that are alive. And so this is in general terms how it works, but it is never exactly, okay? As you can see, I have a space to put the actual germination time and the actual time in which I started harvesting, because I wanted to learn to see, how close it is to what I say, because how this sweet basil behaves in Lawrenceville, Georgia, is not the same way that the sweet basil is going to behave in Florida or in California, right? So I just wanted to be able to have that information and learn, because at the end of the day, gardening is nothing but learning. Okay, so let me show you what my full chart looks like. And by the way, I have been working on this for a couple of seasons, but I am committed this season to complete this chart. I don't have all of this information for everything that I plant, but I am decided that I am going to complete it this year. So let me show you. Okay, so here is what my whole chart looks like. And I don't want to overwhelm you, confuse you, but I just want you to see how amazing it is to have all of this information, because now I know, for example, for my kale, I know that my kale, I need to plant it 8 inches apart from each other. I know that it's going to be about 2 feet tall. I know that I need to plant it around February 17th. And I can move it into the garden 15 days before the last frost date, meaning March 17th. Remember, my last frost date is scheduled to be April 1st. And I'm actually going to record here when it actually happened last year. And I'm actually going to record when it actually is going to be this year. Remember, I am in zone 7B-8, and my growing season is 120 days. That is very important for me to know, because, for example, remember the days to harvest here, for example. So this Swiss chart takes 55 to 60 days from the moment I planted in my garden for it to be ready to start harvesting, right? So that means that if I harvest all of the Swiss chart, because it takes 60 days for me to be able to harvest, let's say I start harvesting from it, it might take a little while for me to take all of it, because it comes back again and again. But that means that because I have, it's not 120 days, it's 210 days. There you go. Because I had 210 days, I can literally plant Swiss chard 3 times. And that's what's called succession planting. Like, I can plant it at one time, start harvesting, plant it again, and by the time I'm done harvesting the first round, I can then the other one will grow, and then I can harvest from there, and I can plant again, and I will still have 3 times 6 is 180. I will still have 30 days to harvest on that last one. So that is why knowing the harvest time or the days to maturity is going to be so important. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this. As I add more tutorials and more videos, if you come back here, look at the description in this video and see if I have more tutorials that go deeper into all of these topics that I'm talking about, so that you can go and really learn all the details of this. I don't want to confuse you, by showing you all this information. Remember that this is the first garden basics. So you need to look at your short list, your simple short list of the plants that you decided that you're going to start in your first garden. And then the plants that you eat, that your family likes, that you're curious about, that you want to plant, that will fit in your space, and that, is going to be something that will bring you joy. And you're going to gather all of the information that you can in those few plants. Now, just because they're few in variety, few in crop and variety, it doesn't mean there's going to be a small garden. You could literally plant 50 tomatoes, and it's still, the information is going to be the same if it's the same plant and the same variety, right? Right now, just in the last video, we talked about picking the list of what you want to grow, and now as you decide that, gather all of this information so that we can get into the planning of your actual layout of your garden. So for that, we're going to go back to Excel, and I'm going to show you how I do it. Okay, we're back in Excel. Now you see a lot of things here. Do not get overwhelmed. Just stay with me, listen to what I say, watch what I'm pointing to, and then you'll see how I do it, okay? And this is actually the layout of my garden, right? And as you can see in here, I'm gonna make it a little smaller. So this is my entire garden. If you've seen some of my videos in my channel, you're gonna see that I have this big bed right here, and that is my in-ground bed. Literally, that is not raised, it's in-ground. I have been improving that soil because I want to see what it takes to improve Georgia clay soil. Okay, so that is one of my beds. All of the other ones are raised beds. I have another raised bed right here that is a long one. I have one here that is 2 by 8, another 2 by 8, and then this one is 1.5 feet by, I think, 10. And I think this is 2 feet by, I think it's like 15 feet long, and I think this is like, whatever extra long. Okay, and here are all the types of plants that I grow, not the varieties, just the type of plants. Okay, so I am just going to, because I don't want to tell you what to think. Remember, I want to show you how I make my decisions and how I design each of my beds individually, so that you can see the thought process that you have to follow based on the knowledge that you have for each of your plants. So in here, I'm just looking about space. I already made my chart to decide when I'm going to start seeds or when I'm going to buy the starter plants. Remember my recommendation, and I'm going to go really quick to that page. My recommendation is, when you get this information, that because this is the first garden, my suggestion again is that you buy starter plants. And so when you have these dates in here, now you know, for example, on a couple of days before April 16, you're going to go to your local garden center or Walmart or grocery store looking for basil plants, and you're going to bring them home, and within 2 or 3 days you're going to put them in your garden. Okay, that's my recommendation. Now I still suggest, why not get a packet or 2 of seeds and try to start them. And do you have to do it, like for example here, I am going to start these seeds on February 19th. Do you have to start them on February 19th? No. Can you start them a week or 2 or 3 or a month later? Absolutely. This is just like the perfect time to maximize the length of the season. But literally, I have started tomatoes and basils in the middle of summer, and it doesn't really matter. This is just the earliest that you should do it, so that you don't end up having the plants get too big on you. Okay, let me go back to here. All right, so here is this is the bed that I'm gonna do. Okay, this is my my bed. It is, each square is 1/2 foot, so 1 foot, 2 feet. And then remember how I told you do squares or use your ruler? So each one of the squares is 1/2 foot, and I did that so that I can properly plant my plant, right? So now that's 1 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet. So it is literally 2 feet by 8 feet, and that's exactly what my bed looks like. Okay, so In this particular bed, I am going to plant tomatoes. So I know that tomatoes require about 18 inches of distance between them. That means 1.5 feet. And so I'm gonna grab this little one, which is my tomatoes, and I'm gonna start not at the end, actually a little bit further than the end. That is right there. And I need to do 1.5 feet. So remember, each box is half a foot. So around here is half, here's 1, here's 2. So I'm gonna grab another one of my boxes and I'm gonna put it here. Wasn't it? 1, 2, 3, yeah, right here. And here's where my second tomato plant's gonna be. And then I'm gonna come down here and that would be 1, 2, 3, right? 1, 2, 3, there you go. And then the next one will be 1, 2, 3, and then the next one will be 1, 2, 3. Perfect. So what this means, oh, is something wrong? Let me see. I'm right on the line. So 1, 2, okay, I need to be here. There you go. So 1, 2, here you go. And then 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. Okay, there you go. Perfect. So that means that in a 8-foot bed, the most that I can fit is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Unless I scoot this over a little bit. Let me see. There you go. 1, 2, 3. There you go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3. You know what? And just, I'm going to squeeze a 6th plant right here. And so, you know, I might move them a little bit. You know, it's going to be a little bit under 18 inches between them, okay? But this is how I'm going to maximize. Remember that it is approximate, but somewhere in there, I'm going to make them even. And I literally go in my bed and I mark them with markers before I plant my plants. So, okay, so now respecting the distance between these plants, because remember, these tomatoes, I have this line right here is actually a trellis that goes up. So the plants are going to be held on against this trellis, and I'm going to keep them single stem. So a little bit of under 18 inches is going to be okay. So I have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tomato plants. That means that tomato plants, I need 6 tomato plants, but because not all the tomato plants are going to come up, I'm going to start from seed. I'm going to start like 10 of them because not all of them are going to come up. So you see how now, based on the space that I have, I am determining how many tomato plants I'm going to need. Now, if it says 6 tomato plants, it doesn't mean that all 6 need to be the same type of tomato. That could mean that it could be 2, like it could be, 6 different tomato plants. It could be 2 plants of each variety. Like that's the decision that I'm going to make. But first I need to know how many I can plant. Now I have a pot in here, literally a pot. And in there, I am actually going to be planting another tomato. So I'm actually going to put 1 tomato right in that, and then it's going to go up in the trellis. Okay, so that is my tomato. Now with my tomatoes, I also like to plant basil. Okay, and so because of that, I'm going to come here and I'm going to take this basil, and I am going to be adding basil in here, and I'm going to be adding another basil plant in here. So that means that it's going to be 2 basil plants. Now in here, I also like to put flowers. So I'm gonna get a marigold, and the flowers are here. There you go. That's the marigold. And now I'm gonna put the marigold here. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. So I'm gonna plant a marigold. Boom. Marigold is a great companion plant for tomatoes, not only because it deters some pests, but also brings pollinators. It's just good altogether. Okay, so I'm gonna put that 1 marigold in here, And let me see what else can I put in here. You know what? I want to, I'm going to, let's see what else I can do. Another flower. How about if I do a nasturtium? I'm gonna have 2 flower plants in that bed, and along with and I'm gonna put that one in here. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's say that this is how I'm going to keep, oh no, yeah, and here at the end, I'm actually gonna put also a sunflower. That's right. Okay, so I'm gonna put a sunflower in there. That's where I put them last year, and they looked amazing. So 1 sunflower right there. Okay, so there you go. So I know that my basil plant requirement is about 8 to 10 inches. I have plenty of space. I know that the marigold is going to be about also 12 to 18 inches. So there's plenty of space around. Here's my basil. I'm gonna move it a little bit over here. Actually, I'm gonna move it over here so that, you know, the sunflower has a space and the tomatoes have the space. I'm gonna move the tomato a little bit here so that the sunflower has plenty of space. And there you go. Now that is the plan for that raised bed, and this is the plan for this tomato. Actually, you know what? In here, I can bring another basil in here. So I can literally put in this pot, I can put my tomato plant, which is going to be at the end, and I can put 1 basil right in front of it, and it will be fantastic. So there you go. So you can see how you are determining, you know, on the space, right? These tomatoes are going to grow up. Therefore, I can put things underneath them in the bottom and use and take advantage of that space. So I'm going to put basil, marigold, basil, and nasturtium. And I'm going to do 1 sunflower. That one is going to be 3 to 5 feet at the end. But because it's at the end, the sun comes this way, so it will not block any of the plants. And now I have planned the space. Now, as you can see, I can fit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tomato plants. I cannot fit 7. I cannot fit 8. I can fit 6. So now based on that, I will decide of the 6 tomato plants that I can grow, which ones I'm gonna do. And from there, I go back and start them. You know, I start the number of seeds, and that's what this chart is for the number of seeds, so that I can end up with the 6 plants. And I plant a couple of extra ones, like I said, because they don't all work out. All right, I hope I didn't confuse you too much. And that this kind of gives you an idea of how you can think about it. As you can see, there are so many options based on, you know, your plant, your space. So you're going to be in pots, and you're going to be in the ground, what size it is. And so it would be impossible for me to tell you what to do with everything in this short video. The whole idea of this first garden basics is that you are able to learn how to think when you're making your plan, so that you don't end up with a lot of starter plants that you can't plant, or seeds that you can't plant, and have to end up like I did one time with a whole bunch of pots, extra pots all over the place because I just couldn't throw them away. And so if you do it this way, just start small, pick the plants you want, then go and get all the information from each one of them that you can. And with that information, you know, because you now know where you're going to plant and what space you're going to have, you can start making your decisions of how many plants of what plant and what varieties you're going to plant in your garden. Okay? I hope that was not too overwhelming for you. I know that some of you are not Excel wizards. You're not computer, wizards. I use Excel all the time, and I love it, as you can see. Now, but you don't have to. You can literally do the same thing I just did in a piece of paper with pencils and colors if you want, and plan your garden. My first planning actually was in a piece of paper with pencil, which I was doing it over and over again, and then eventually I put it in Excel as, you know, in the future seasons for my planting. Now I have a system that works for me, and if you're interested to get it, I might have a lesson specifically on how to build it, you know, in much more detail. And I will put the link below here as one of the tutorials that I'm adding to this whole video series. Oh yeah, so remember, go back to the description of this video and see if there are any tutorials that I have added in the future as I have, created videos specifically that go in much more depth of all of these concepts, okay? So if you're interested in that, see if below there's a link to that detailed tutorial, and if you're interested to get a copy of this Excel sheet, you can join us at the Sanctuary in Soil Facebook group and send me a message over there, all right? So thank you for being with me in this step number 6 of planning your first garden basics. And the next step is step number 7, which is start. Yes, on the next step, we are going to learn how to start seeds and where to get your starter plants. All right? Thank you for being with me, and we'll see you in the next video.